On Tech News Today, we're joined by Lee Hutchinson of Ars Technica, Buster Hein of Culta Mac, and Tim Stevens of CNET. And of course, we're talking about Apple's big news from the Worldwide Developers Conference. It's all coming up right now.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Tech News Today is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Tech News Today for Tuesday, June 3rd, 2014. This episode is brought to you by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform that makes it fast and easy to create your own professional website or online portfolio. For a free 2-week trial and 10% off, go to squarespace.com and use the offer code TNT. Welcome to Tech News Today. I'm Mike Elgan.
I'm Joe Panettieri.
And I'm Jason Howell.
Tech News Today explores the big stories of the day with some of the world's best journalists. Well, Joe Panettieri, welcome. You are our Tuesday co-anchor from now until the end of time.
Eternity.
And it is Tuesday, so that's a good sign. I'm here on the right day.
That's right.
Thanks for the invite, Mike. I appreciate it.
Even if you show up on Monday, you're always welcome here on Tech News Today, Joe. Well, why don't we jump into the news? What are we going to talk about? Why don't we just go ahead and talk about Apple? They announced a few things yesterday. Apple unveiled a mind-boggling range of products, actually, and also services, updates, and programs. And they did it during their keynote address of the Worldwide Developers Conference yesterday in San Francisco. The company announced and demonstrated new versions of its operating system, including OS X Yosemite and iOS 8. Apple borrowed, with air quotes, ideas from not only Android, but also iOS apps, seriously threatening the existence of companies that make apps like Dropbox, Glimpse, Sketch, and DocuSign. They also rolled out some unique and powerful innovations. Let's first look at the refresh of Apple's desktop operating system called OS X Yosemite. Lee Hutchinson is a senior reviews editor at Ars Technica, and he joins us now. Welcome.
Hey, everybody.
Now, Lee, how major of an overhaul would you consider Yosemite to be?
Well, it seems like it's got a relatively large amount of changes to the user interface. What it doesn't look like it has, at least looking at some of the past OS releases, is a huge amount of under the hood changes. You know, in the past we've heard about stuff like the new power management features or Grand Central, but in this case the focus seemed to be on the UI and then on some of the additional apps, and then the continuity stuff, of course, is really cool. So yeah. The UI is going to be the stuff that people see the most. That even if you make small changes to the user interface, that always looks big because that's what people put their hands on. That's what people touch the most.
Yeah. Hey, Lee, Joe Panettieri here. In terms of that new design and that approach, do you see OS X or this Yosemite release getting closer and closer to iOS and the iOS 8 release? Are we going to see more and more similarities there, or are they still two distinct operating systems in your mind for the long haul?
The answer to that question is kind of complicated, but Apple has said more than once that they do intend to keep the desktop experience and the mobile experience ultimately separate, even if they look like they're converging a little bit. With Yosemite, we've seen some interesting stuff. For the first time in a long time, for example, the system typeface has changed. It's not Lucidia Grande anymore. It's now Helvetica Neue, and it looks a lot more similar to the iOS 7, slim typeface. We've got flat style icons. There's transparency throughout the operating system that looks a lot like iOS 7 does. There are a lot of visual changes that do indeed shift it a little more toward the mobile side. But what I think we will always see on the desktop is, things like the Finder, the access to the file system, the ability to install apps outside of an app store. Like, there are always going to be key differentiators, and Apple is very aware that desktop users want that, and they're going to keep those. Now,
you talked about mobile, sort of pointing toward mobile type conventions. The notification center is really interesting. It seems and operates almost like an iPhone that slides out from the side. Can you tell us about the new notification center?
It does. It's actually a pretty big improvement over the last one. It's kind of funny, when it was announced, Casey Johnston, one of our editors at Ars, said that she kind of jokingly said that she already looks at the notification center and all the stack of notifications in terror, and now there's just going to be that many more things over in the notification center to have to pay attention to. But Apple has added customization. You can drag and drop items on there. they've really expanded it and kind of made it into a much more iOS-like experience. Yeah.
And you can actually kind of install things on it, right? Widgets and apps and things like that. It's almost like a secondary user interface.
Yeah, it's like they've taken things from the desktop and slid them over there so that you can have quick access to them. It's a neat idea. Some people heavily use the notification center. I'm not a big notification center user. In fact, I still have Growl installed on my Mac, and I still use Growl notifications. So I'm one of those really ancient graybeards who just refuses to let go of the old way still.
And
yeah, how about the use of the Mac as a phone going forward? That seemed to be part of the demo yesterday. It caught my attention, but I didn't know how much of it was really, truly innovative rather than a Me Too approach by Apple.
Well, that's a good question too, and I'm actually really excited about that because when I walk in, when I come into the house, I typically will throw my phone down on the couch and then come in here to the office and start working, and then about like 10 or 15 minutes later, I'll be like, dang it, now I need to use my phone, or I'll hear the text message alert go off in the other room. Previously, Apple has echoed things like iMessages alerts up onto the Mac, but not phone calls and not SMS. So this is actually really exciting. Now I can come into the house, throw my phone on the couch like I usually do, and if I get a phone call or whatever, or if I need to make a phone call, I don't have to get up. The new, what are they calling it? Handoff, I think, is the feature for this. It's part of the continuity feature set that they've announced. You can now echo phone calls up onto your Mac and use your Mac kind of as a big gigantic speakerphone, and it'll use the nice built-in, microphone with echo cancellation that all the new Macs have. So yeah, actually, out of all of the features they announced, even though that's it's not a huge one. That actually is the one I'm the most excited about. I'm really looking forward to that.
Now, you mentioned continuity. What else is involved in this continuity feature? It sounded like one of the most radical things that they announced around Yosemite.
Yes, yeah, it was. So there are several components to it. One of the most interesting and overdue is that AirDrop now works between mobile and desktop. Previously, even though AirDrop was present, that AirDrop feature was present on iOS, you couldn't actually use it to transfer items between iOS and the Mac desktop. You could go between Macs and Macs, or you could go between mobile and mobile, but you couldn't send between a Mac and a mobile. And so now they've finally changed AirDrop so that if you've got like a picture on your phone that you want to send over to your computer and you don't want to have to email it to yourself or SMS or iMessage it to yourself, you can just AirDrop it and it'll go over ad hoc Wi-Fi, which is really cool. The other big thing is they've got this as part of the handoff feature. Not only does this work on the phone side with SMS and all that, it actually tracks application state. So the example that Apple gave is, let's say you're working on a numbers document on your Mac and you're putting charts and stuff in and you realize you have to go somewhere where you can pick up your iOS device and your numbers, and then you tap an icon on the desktop and your numbers document will shift over to your iOS device and you can walk out the door with it. Now, what Apple hasn't announced are a lot of the specifics around how this is going to work. Obviously, you'll have to have the same application on desktop and mobile, but I don't believe they've announced yet whether this is going to work only with Apple applications or if third-party developers are going to be able to take advantage of this or not. It's a neat feature, and it's something that has been present before kind of on an app-by-app basis, but this is the first time it's been on the Mac side of things anyway. This is the first time it's been available as like a big system-wide thing.
Yeah, and a lot of this stuff is pretty radical. And, even though it's been available in different ways in different places, for example, the answer your laptop has been available in Google Voice for a long time, but not the handoff part of it. And so the real thing that Apple theoretically brings to the table is integration and ease of use and having things just work. There are many other cases where some of the stuff available by third parties doesn't really work quite the way it should, and Apple could make it work. The question is, will they? Can they? And that's really the proof is in the pudding with this stuff. We'll see if they can really pull it off. Well, Lee Hutchinson, I want to thank you for coming on Tech News today and telling us all about Yosemite.
Thank you for having, guys. This was fun.
All right. Thanks again. You can find Lee Hutchinson at arstechnica.com and also on Twitter at Lee_ARS. Well, in just a sec, we're going to talk about iOS 8, the mobile operating system that Apple announced yesterday. But first, I want to tell you about Squarespace. Squarespace is the #1 place in the universe, at least that I'm aware of, for building a website. The reason it's great is because it starts with beautiful design. Squarespace has 25 beautiful templates for you to choose from. So you pick a template and just start building your website. You can add pages, add features, add functionality. You can take things away. You can make it as simple or as complex as you like. But no matter what you do to customize it, you're going to keep that original beautiful design if you want to, and you'll always have this super professional, super well-designed website. It's also very easy to use. All the tools are very simple, but if you do need help, live chat and email support is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Plus, there's a completely redesigned customer help site for access to articles and video workshops. E-commerce is available for all subscription plan levels, which is amazing because that enables you to sell things on your company's website or just raise money for a cash wedding registry or school fund drive, whatever it is you need to do to raise money. And it starts at just $8 a month, and that includes a free domain name if you sign up for a year. So start a free 2-week trial with no credit card required and start building your website. When you decide to sign up for Squarespace, make sure you use the offer code TNT, and that'll get you 10% off the price. And we thank Squarespace for their support of Tech News Today. And remember that a better web awaits, and it starts with your new Squarespace website.
Well, Mike, as you also mentioned, Apple unveiled the iOS 8 operating system, the next version of its operating system for its phone and tablet technology. We've got Buster Hein here. He writes for the Cult of Mac. Buster, welcome to the show. Wondering from your perspective, what do you think is the biggest new feature in iOS 8? Anything that really caught your attention there?
You know, I think a lot of the back-end stuff for developers is pretty much the most exciting stuff. The Health Kit, new stuff, also HomeKit for home automation. And we won't really see those for a while. As far as new features, Spotlight advanced search is pretty nice, but I think I like QuickType the best so far.
Now, we saw in Yosemite that the notifications is now taking on a life of its own, and that's also true in iOS 8, isn't it? I mean, for example, you can launch apps without and do things without even going to the apps.
Yeah, you can reply to a text message when you're in like Facebook or something like that, or Instagram. Same thing with you get like an eBay notification. You can just swipe down and act on those notifications instead of having to go back to your notification center and get out of the app.
Hey, Buster, some other chatter I heard from a few of our readers and a few of our viewers out there involved something called Easy Hotspot, I believe. Can you explain that a little bit to us?
Easy Hotspot, it allows you to connect with devices without you being on a Wi-Fi network. I believe that's the feature you're talking about, so that you can toss files or information between two iPhones without having to be in a Wi-Fi network, which is awesome, especially if like you're outdoors or away and you need to send just a picture to a friend or a couple of pictures to a friend or a video. So that should be a very useful feature for groups going forward.
Now, Buster, the keyboard universe is changing radically in iOS 8. I remember when the iPhone first shipped, there was no physical keyboard, third-party physical keyboard that you could buy. Not only because Apple didn't make one, but they also didn't allow anyone else to sell one or make one. And then they allowed third-party keyboards and, in fact, came to function even with their own full-size keyboard. And now the keyboard is really, the keyboard universe and options are really exploding in iOS 8.
Yeah, they added third-party keyboards, so you can do swipe and other popular Android keyboards that have been popular for years. I'm actually pretty surprised Apple did that because they just usually don't let people have that much control over the OS. But it's really cool that they are doing that to give some different options because some people don't really enjoy the new iOS keyboard as well. So it's great that we have more options to come once it comes out.
Anything going on the messaging front? You know, I did hear some chatter about improved audio, video, and self-destructive messages, but I haven't really tracked it or followed up on that. Have you had an opportunity to check that out?
Yeah, there's a new feature they showed off. You can send kind of actually Apple's taking on Snapchat a little bit and WhatsApp with short voice notes that you can send. You pull up your iMessage, you tap on just microphones right there and just start talking to it. And as soon as you stop, you just gesture upward to send it to your friend or to the left to cancel it if you hated it. And you can set it to expire. You can remove it. That's pretty cool. Also, they've added the ability to finally leave group messages. So if somebody adds you to a huge text message conversation with 10 people. You don't have to get bogged down with tons of notifications. You can just leave the thread immediately, which is pretty sweet.
Buster, tell us about the new Photos app.
Photos also gets a big revamp. They've added a timer, which is nice. So you don't have to go to like a third-party app. They've also added separate exposure and focus points, which is something Camera Plus and VSCO have had for a long time. There's also video gets time lapse as well, which should be pretty interesting. I haven't got to play around with it yet, but there's not even a lot of third-party apps that do time lapse video, so that's a pretty sweet new feature that's coming out too. And also there's editorial controls, better compositions. You can change the shadows, boost your highlights, change your colors as well. So it's just a much more advanced Photos app, as well as there's also search as well inside of Photos. So Photos got a ton of attention this time around. Yeah,
it looks very cool. Also, one other minor addition to what you can do with Siri is that you can now conjure up Siri just by talking and say, "Hey Siri," which is different from Google's "OK Google" or "OK Glass" or whatever. And I think the consensus is that "Hey" is better than "OK." And so Apple deserves some credit for that innovation.
Yeah, it's definitely more natural. And also the Shazam integration is pretty cool. You don't even have to ask Siri to do stuff with the Shazam integration. You just pull up Siri and it will listen to the songs around you and ask you if you want to buy, you know, the latest Neil Diamond song that's playing around you.
All right. Well, Buster Hein, I want to thank you for coming on Tech News today and telling us about iOS 8.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. You can find Buster Hein at cultofmac.com and on Twitter at BST3R. The biggest announcement from Apple's keynote, although the one least appreciated by the public, no doubt, is the introduction of an entirely new programming language, which is called Swift. Here to tell us all about Swift is Tim Stevens, the editor-at-large at CNET. Welcome, Tim.
Hey, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Tim, what was wrong with Objective-C?
Well, I don't know that there's anything wrong with Objective-C so much. It is a little bit cumbersome and a little bit difficult to learn, and it's also fairly old. Objective-C dates back to the early 80s, and it's, of course, built on the C programming language, which itself dates back to the early 70s. So you could say that perhaps it's a time for a new programming language, but definitely, there's a lot of interest right now in scripting languages, which give you a little bit more flexibility, and you can definitely write applications more quickly in a scripting language than in a traditional strongly typed programming language. So what Swift does is it kind of takes the best of Objective-C, and it also brings in a lot of aspects from a more modern scripting language like, say, Python, for example, and lets developers do a lot more interesting things more quickly. In theory, at least, it's a much more terse programming language, so you don't have to write as much as you did before, basically. And also, it's got a lot of new developer tools and debugging tools and that kind of thing, which should make it easier for developers to get up to speed quickly.
So in terms of if I'm a developer in this scenario, do I have to move forward with Swift, or is this an optional path forward? How would you describe it?
That's what's still a little bit unclear. From what I can tell, it looks like Objective-C and Swift compile to the same bytecode, which means that basically as far as your phone or your desktop is concerned, it doesn't really matter where it came from. So because of that, you should be able to transition gradually or maybe even not transition at all if you're on Objective-C. But I certainly think that Apple will be throwing its developer weight behind Swift going forward. I'm guessing that Xcode, their developer toolkit and platform, will definitely be optimized for Swift going forward. And I think that we'll definitely see a lot of interest in working with Swift, especially because the benchmarks that they showed show that Swift applications run much more quickly than Objective-C applications. So there's a lot of potential there. So I think it'll be a gradual transition, but certainly there'll be a lot of pushing from Apple to get people over to Swift going forward.
Besides the performance, do you think there's going to be any noticeable difference in the applications that are developed by Swift developers that will, for example, will they be more standardized? Will the applications look more similar to each other?
I don't think that we'll necessarily see any changes from a visual presentation standpoint. Ultimately, what you can do there remains the same as you could in Objective-C when it comes to visual controls and that kind of thing. But certainly, we could see some improvements when it comes to performance. Ultimately, all that we really have to go on at this point is a couple of bar charts that Apple showed during the keynote, which showed that benchmarks on Swift applications run more quickly than they do on Objective-C or certainly than on Python-based applications as well. So if indeed the performance is true across the board and not just in those selected benchmarks, and definitely applications written in Swift could be much more responsive. You could imagine it being like the difference between going from the 5 to the 5S without actually having to get a new phone.
Hey, Tim, what about the overall developer pool for Apple? Does Swift open up development to more and more novice developers, so to speak, you know, the newbies of the world?
Yeah, I definitely think it does. I mean, there's a bit of a danger here in that it's basically throwing out this entire ecosystem of developers that's been built up. You know, there's a whole industry around teaching people how to write iPhone games at this point, and all that kind of goes out the window, which is a little bit dangerous. But ultimately, Swift does look like it's going to be a lot easier to pick up than Objective-C, and certainly a lot easier to test. There's this thing, a concept called a playground within the Swift developer environment, where you can very quickly and easily get code running and see the results of the code as you're writing it, which is something that you can't really easily do in Objective-C. That right there will make it a lot easier for novice developers to see what's going on as they're writing these applications. It should be a lot easier for them. So yeah, I definitely think we should see a lot more new developers coming in.
I would imagine that the reception of this news that Apple has this new operating system, this new programming language, is going to vary according to how old the developer is. For example, if you have been working on Objective-C for 20 years and you have a huge advantage because you have all that experience, whereas another developer who maybe has spent a year learning it isn't going to be too vexed by this information. So this kind of has this is going to be received badly by some developers, isn't it?
Yeah, I spoke with a couple developers at WWDC yesterday to get their thoughts, and some of them were very excited, but all of them expressed a little bit of fear at the learning curve here, having to pick up a new programming language entirely. The syntax, though, is very similar to C. Ultimately, I think that people will be able to transition fairly quickly if they want to. But again, it looks like there's still a path there for those developers who are on Objective-C, who are happy there and who don't want to move forward. I think that they'll be able to stay there for quite a while anyway.
Yeah, I was impressed by the fact that Apple kept this so secret. I'm not aware of anyone who had this news, and I guess it's easier to keep things secret when you don't have to send the product to China for manufacturing.
Certainly, and especially when you're talking about a product that the vast majority of the media don't understand anyway, that I think helps as well.
Yeah, well, Tim Stevens, I want to thank you for coming on Tech News Today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, you can find Tim Stevens' work at cnet.com, and you can find Tim on Twitter at Tim_Stevens.
Well, Mike, great stuff so far. But, you know, there were also a lengthy list of what I would call, quote unquote, miscellaneous announcements out of Apple last week, or I should say yesterday, excuse me. And a lot of them come under the, quote unquote, kit area, health kit, home kit, family sharing for iTunes, etc. What did you think, first of all, of the kit approach that we heard about? There was plenty of buzz about that on the net yesterday, and it continues today.
Well, it's cool, and they're clearly going into a new sort of realm of sort of bundling and packaging these kinds of features that are essentially initiatives. Let's face it, these are the industries that Apple, anytime Apple now wants to take over a new industry, they're going to put the word kit at the end of it. So, for example, in HealthKit, you know, lots of people are targeting the healthcare market and the fitness market and biometric market. You see the big announcement from Samsung last week with their new health initiatives, and so Apple wants to get in front of these parades and use its vast reach, the fact that its user base is kind of a big spending user base, to drive these things home. You know, HealthKit, we kind of saw this coming because we know that they've been hiring a lot of health-oriented professionals. The one that I'm most excited about is the HomeKit initiative. I've been covering home automation for some time now, and you see this big shift away from proprietary spoken hub type of solutions that are by the whole list of companies that Apple actually put up on as a slide yesterday that they say that they're working with. You see a shift from that universe to the universe of doing it all with smartphone apps. And of course, Apple's in the lead on those things. If you look at you know, Kickstarter and so on, you see these bootstrapped home automation solutions. They almost always support the iOS. Sometimes they support Android as well, but almost always the iOS. So this is an attempt by Apple to get in front of that particular parade, and I think it's a good thing because they'll eventually have some standards. And also, you know, the biggest problem with home automation right now, Joe, is that, you know, you have an app for this and an app for that, and how many apps really can you handle, and how, you know, it's not really automated if you spend all your time hunting for apps.
No, or hunting for remotes. This certainly also caught my ear because, you know, on the corporate IT side and the enterprise side, we're hearing a lot about the Internet of Things. And it seems to me that Apple, once again, has taken a very technical term and a very technical discussion and consumerized it practically overnight, and trying to make sure that people understand just how much power every endpoint is going to have if it's properly managed going forward, particularly in the home.
Yeah. There was another interesting thing that came out yesterday, which is that Apple is going to support virtual currencies, presumably Bitcoin and probably others, for purchasing things. And they're kind of going to decide which are the legitimate ones and which are the illegitimate ones. We don't know who's going to decide that. Somebody at Apple is, obviously, but what their criteria are going to be. So they're putting themselves in a position of being a kind of kingmaker for virtual currencies. This, along with some of the continuity features, the alternative keyboards, strike me as being very uncharacteristic moves by Apple, the kinds of things that you wouldn't have seen under Steve Jobs, in my opinion. They're just opening up and being more open-minded, I guess is for lack of a better term. The idea of supporting virtual currencies just seems very un-Apple-like.
Yeah, I think the term I would use is open enough. Gone are the days when Apple can just surprise you with a completely closed system, because everyone's familiar now with that game plan in the music business and the mobile business, and they know how Apple did it the first time around. So now Apple needs to be open enough to get people onto their platform, invite them to the party, and make sure that other companies feel as if they can profit in an Apple ecosystem going forward.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Joe Panettieri, here's some good news if you thought Google Glass was underpriced. The company announced new headsets created in collaboration with fashion designer Diane von Furstenberg's studio, DVF. The so-called made-for-glass designs go on sale June 23rd and cost about $1,600 to $1,725, according to The Verge. The lesson here is that you're going to probably need to open Google Wallet even wider for Google Glass. Now, everybody was expecting them to change the price, but I think people thought the price would be going down.
Yeah. And I don't think it's a supply and demand thing quite yet. We'll see. But I think the only person celebrating this news is probably my wife, who was quite upset when I spent the $1,500 on the original Google Glass. Now I can show her that I actually cornered the market on the device.
So right now, Joe, it's probably not a good time to be a European worker, is it?
No. So there are others reports coming out of Europe right now that the European Union is going to invest billions on trying to build out a robotics ecosystem. And the irony of it is, if you look at the reports, is 70% of the people tracking this news in Europe feel as if robots are actually going to eliminate jobs rather than create jobs. But, actually all the research does show that the robotics industry will create jobs. So we'll see who comes out on the, on the upside on this whole chatter. But I think it was $3.8 billion involved in this research going forward.
Well, it's good that they're getting into robotics right now. The United States and Japan, I think, are leaders. Korea is working on it. China, I think, has more spending on robots than any other country. Those tend to be big manufacturing robots. But it's good to see Europe doing it, even if they're doing it in a very European way, which is kind of centralized, top-down. We'll see what comes of that. Well, that's the tech news today. Joe Panettieri, I'm super excited that you are our new Tuesday co-anchor. Always love having you on the show, and so I'm glad you're here.
Well, thanks for having me, Mike. I really appreciate it, and I'm enjoying it. So I look forward to being back next Tuesday.
Wonderful. You can subscribe to Tech News Today at twit.tv/TNT. You got to subscribe. What are you doing? If you're not subscribing, you got to subscribe. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/TechNewsToday. And follow us on Twitter at TechNewsTodayTV. And we want to hear from you. Comment on Twitter or Google+ using the hashtag TechNewsToday. And please send us an email at TNT@twit.tv. Tell us what's on your mind, or leave a voicemail by calling 260-TNT Show. And don't miss our evening newscast, Tech News Tonight, at 4 p.m. Pacific tonight and every weeknight. My name is Mike Elgan. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you tomorrow.